everybody. So we are outside of my house in my front yard, and we're going to be measuring the carbon stores inside this Acer rubrum or red maple tree. It's a rather large tree in my front yard, and in order to figure out what type of tree it was, I used this dead leaf that I found on the ground and two different apps just to verify that it was in fact a red maple. I used the Google Scan app and the Picture This app. So that's how I figured out what kind of tree it was. So what we're going to do is measure the circumference of the tree, and then later on we'll figure out what the diameter is, which is what we need to figure out the carbon stores with all the calculations that we'll get to later. So remember, when you're measuring your tree, you have to do it at 4 feet 6 inches from the ground so that all data measurements are consistent among all the data that we're going to be collecting. So in order to do that, you have to first measure yourself and see where that distance is. So for myself, I already measured it, and 4 feet 6 inches is about right here on me, so that's where I'm going to measure on the tree. The tools you're going to need are a Sharpie or some kind of a pen, a tack, and then a string that's going to go around the tree. And then later we'll take this inside and use a tape measure, a yardstick, or rulers, whatever you have to measure the actual circumference around the tree. So go ahead and start by sticking this in the tree, remember at 4 feet 6 inches tall. So for me, that's right about here. And then bring your string all the way around the tree, trying to make sure it's as straight as possible when you do your measurement. And then you're just going to make a mark at that spot. Okay, so we have measured the circumference of the tree, and now I have a tape measure on my bedroom floor because the string ended up being pretty long, and I have it lined up with the end of this string, and I tried to lay it out as straight as I could to get the measurement. And then this is the mark that I made with the red marker on the tree. And remember, you want to move up to the closest inch, so that would be 76 inches in this case. And also, since we're here, you can see my kitty. Clover, say hello to all the students.
All right, hello. So for this part of the lab, I'm going to show you how to make all of the calculations from the measurement that I took from my red maple tree outside. And you can follow along with your own personal measurements that you took from your tree and figure out how much carbon is stored in that tree and what that actually means to us. So I'll be sending you this link for the lab investigation, how much carbon is stored in a local tree, and you'll see the materials and resources you need. Assuming you've already measured your tree, you can kind of ignore these, and I'll go through them as I proceed. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is open up the student data sheet, make a copy of it, save it on your own Google Doc, and you'll be using this to record your data. So when you click this open, it's going to look something like this. So I've renamed mine to My Name data sheet. You'll want to do the same for yours. For when you send it to your teacher for extra credit, they'll know who it came from. So for the first part of the data sheet, you'll just enter your name, today's date, whatever that might be, the tree species name. So we'll have already looked this up using either Google Lens or any other app that you found. Picture This is the other one that I used to figure out what the tree species name is, like I showed you how to do in the first video. So for my tree, it was Acer rubrum. The common name for the tree is red maple. This is the species name. And I also found out on that same app that it was a softwood. So that's important to figure out for some of the calculations below. They're going to be a little bit different based on whether it's a softwood tree or a hardwood tree. So then I just made a couple observations of my tree and its environment. I said where it was located. It's in the front yard. I should probably add in here that it's in Salem, New Hampshire, so we know the approximate location of where the tree was found. Could also put temperature data, what the weather was like when you took the measurement, anything like that would be observations. So I just put the tree that was measured was in the front yard of a Salem, New Hampshire home in a densely populated neighborhood, and it's the only tree that I happen to have in my front yard. It is deciduous, so it doesn't have any leaves on it at the moment. There is definitely some dead branches in my tree. There's some fungus and molds in there. I also have woodpeckers that are destroying some of the branches as well, but it otherwise is a healthy tree. So one of the first things I did was measure the circumference of the tree. So that's what I did when I went outside with my string. And I determined it was 76 inches, if you remember from that recording. So I had to convert that to centimeters because the measurements that we need to be in centimeters. So basically, you'll take whatever you recorded in inches, or you can just measure it outright in centimeters to begin with. But if you measure in inches like I did, I had to multiply that by 2.54, and that gave me this number of 193 centimeters. So that's the first step. The second step is to figure out the diameter of the tree. Remember, the circumference is the distance all the way around the tree. The diameter is the sort of, if you looked at the cross section of the tree, it would be from one point to the other. So we can't really measure that. We have to cut the tree in half to do that. So we can use this calculation, which is basically to take the diameter we calculated, in our case it was 193, and divide that by 3.14, which is pi. So I did 193 divided by 61.46, and I'm sorry, divided by 3.14, and I got this measurement here. So I'm also showing my sample work in this document, just so you can see what I did for my measurements. So that's 193 centimeters divided by 3.14, and that's going to give me that answer I got up there, 61.46 centimeters. And I'm trying to do all of my work and all of my writing in a different color, just so it's easier to see the data. All right, the next step is to look at the allometric coefficients for my tree species. So there's an A coefficient and a B coefficient that I'm going to need to plug into this equation right here to determine the biomass of the tree. Remember, biomass is the mass of a living thing. So because a tree is a living organism, we'll calculate its biomass. The instructions for all of this is back over on the lab investigation. I'm just kind of skipping over all of these words just to make the video a little shorter, but you can see all of these different ways to measure. You should be watching this video first on how to measure diameter. I also demonstrated that outside with my own video. And then for this part right here, the allometric coefficients, this is a document. So if you click on this document, you'll see this word document appear. And these are all the tree species that it has. So make sure for the tree that you measure, it's in this list. Most of the common trees in our area will be in this list. So I highlighted my tree, which is the red maple, and then these are the coefficients that we'll be using. So coefficient A is 0.09 and coefficient B is 2.51. So that's where I got these measurements here for my data sheet, 0.09 and 2.51. And then we're going to use this calculation. So M stands for biomass, and that's going to be equal to A, which is the coefficient A, times D, which is the diameter of the tree. So we measured that up here. And that's going to be to the exponent of the B coefficient, 2.51. So I rewrote the equation down here and plugged in all of my measurements first. So my biomass is what I'm trying to solve for. So that's going to stay M is equal to coefficient A, 0.09, times, I didn't really have to put that there because I have parentheses, but just so you can really see it, the diameter, which was 61.46 from up here, centimeters. And then this little caret means to the power of 2.51. So the math that we have to do first because of PEMDAS is what's inside of the parentheses. So 61.46 to the power of 251. And I ended up getting this for my answer. And I did not calculate that myself. I used a little calculator. And again, if you go to the lab investigation document, it has links to all of these calculators for you. So here's a link for that. There's also an additional example calculation here you can look at, but if you click on the link to the exponent calculator, it'll bring you to this. So you'll type in your base. So if I go back and look at my data sheet, I have my base, which is going to be right here, 61.46. Type that in here, 61.46. And then that's going to be to the exponent of 2.51, or to the 2.51th power. So I add that in there, and then I'll hit calculate. And it takes just a little bit for it to think here. And then it kind of shows you what that calculation looks like here. And then this is the answer. Ooh, that just changed on us. So 30,857. So if I go back over here to my data sheet, you can see I now substituted this mathematical equation for the answer that the calculator found for us. And then the last thing we have to do is remember to multiply the coefficient A times that number. So 0.09 times 30,857 is going to give us a biomass of 2,777.22 kilograms. Make sure I add the units. Units are so important in science. All right, so the biomass of my red maple in my front yard is 2,777.22 kilograms. So the next thing we're going to look at is the mass of the carbon. So we're trying to look at the carbon that's stored in that tree. So to figure that out, and again, if you go back to the lab investigation, it tells you there's some additional information here too. It says calculate the approximate mass of carbon atoms stored in your tree in kilograms. And then there's another little explanation here. It says a tree's biomass contains carbon atoms in addition to hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur atoms. Foresters know that approximately half of a tree's biomass is made of carbon atoms. This value is slightly different in hardwoods versus softwood trees. So to determine the amount of carbon in your species of tree, choose from one of the following. So if you have a hardwood tree, you use this calculation. If you have a softwood, use this calculation. So if we look back at my data sheet, you can see I ignored this first equation here because the red maple is a softwood tree. So all I had to do here was take my mass of carbon stored and multiply it times 0.0498. So again, I showed my work. Whoops, just kidding, that's the wrong number. I'm going to take the biomass of my tree, which is up here, 2777.22, and I'm going to multiply that times 0.49, which is going to give me this as my answer. So this is the total tree biomass of carbon. So 1,383.06 kilograms. And then next, so many lovely calculations here. So the next thing we're going to look at is the approximate amount of carbon dioxide our tree absorbed. Why do you think that's so important? Removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Think about that. And we'll be talking about it in our lab on Monday, or in our live lesson on Monday. So calculate the approximate amount of carbon dioxide your tree absorbed via photosynthesis to create its stored mass of carbon. Note, not all carbon dioxide a tree takes in gets stored as mass. Some returns to the air via respiration. Just like we breathe out carbon dioxide when we respire, trees give it off when they respire. So scientists have determined that 1 kilogram of carbon is equivalent to approximately 3.767 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Thus, multiplying the carbon stored in kilograms in your tree by 3.67 will give you an approximate measure of carbon dioxide taken in via photosynthesis stored in the tree. So if we go back to my data sheet, we're again trying to calculate the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed from the air to create the mass of carbon stored in the tree. So we multiply the mass of the carbon stored. So here's the mass of the carbon stored. We calculated that right up here. And we multiply that times this number that they've given us, 3.67. And I ended up getting 5,075.83 kilograms of carbon dioxide absorbed from the air to create the mass stored in the tree. This last part is optional. It basically is just going to convert the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed in the air to the amount of tree carbon the tree has. So again, if we look kind of back over here, it says convert the mass of carbon stored in your tree to metric tons. This is the terminology that scientists usually use to measure carbon dioxide in the air. That's why I think it's a pretty important measurement to make. So it says scientists normally use metric tons to quantify carbon storage. Do a simple calculation using this conversion factor. So 1 metric ton is equal to 1,000 kilograms, or you can use this worldwide metric calculator. So if we go back to my data, and if we look at that worldwide data sheet, there's kind of a lot of stuff on here that we don't know. But what we're looking to do is figure out the metric tons of carbon that we have. And what information do we know to plug in? So let me clear all this out there we go, clear it all out real quick. So what we have is the mass of, so we have the mass of the carbon dioxide absorbed from the air, and we know that that's 5,075.83. So if we take this number, we can plug it into this calculator, and that was in kilograms. So I already forgot my number, let's see, 5075.83. And then if we go calculate, it'll tell us all the rest of these weight conversions too. But we're really only interested in, in this one, which was, I'm not going to type it in again, 5.075 metric tons of carbon dioxide. So basically you just have to take your number and divide it by 1,000. So it's a pretty easy calculation to figure out this here. And then to figure out how many pounds it is, you can go back and just look at that calculator again, and it will be there for you. So my tree in my yard is going to have 5,075 metric tons of carbon stored in it. And to put that into perspective, a male African elephant weighs close to 7 metric tons. So the amount of carbon dioxide in my tree out front is almost as much as an adult elephant weighs, if we're comparing the weight of just the carbon and the actual whole weight of the entire elephant. So that's just one single tree holding that much carbon. So try to think about, a whole forest of trees and how much carbon would be inside of those trees. And remember, all of that carbon comes from the carbon dioxide gas in the atmosphere. So that's pretty cool to think about, but in order for us to take the current emission levels of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, we have to plant about 5 billion of those trees per year. So that's clearly not a very practical solution, but planting as many trees as we can will certainly help reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because the plants are going to take it in for carbon dioxide and then return it to the mass of the tree. So we definitely have to think of other ways to reduce our carbon footprint and take some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that's by stopping the emissions or reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that we emit into the atmosphere. And we can do simple things like drive less, carpool, take bikes and, walk to places that are local, stop burning so many fossil fuels, that kind of thing. But it's a big problem, and certainly not something that we're going to solve today. But hopefully you got a good idea of how much carbon is stored in a tree local to your house, and the importance of that tree in reducing carbon emissions in the atmosphere. All right, I look forward to seeing your data. I would also like you to send me a picture of you measuring your tree or doing your data calculations as part of the extra credit assignment. I look forward to seeing these, and I hope you all have a fabulous day.